Thanks for tuning in to the Prosperity for America channel. Today we're going to continue our series on how to interview more effectively for whatever specific kind of position you are looking for. Today we're going to talk about mechanical engineers and mechanical engineers positions. We're going to focus more on design engineer positions as opposed to manufacturing engineer positions or other types of engineer positions. So today we're going to talk about how specifically to interview more effectively for a mechanical engineering design position. Now, going into the interview, first of all, to make sure you're prepared, it's always good to have a resume for each person you might meet. So that way, even though you know you've mailed the resume to them and you know they should have it, it's good to have it handy. And it's also good to have one that's tailored for the position you're applying to. And what I mean by that is you have your boilerplate resume, and then you have your resume that is for the specific dream job you're hoping to find. You really should bring the one that is for the position that you are applying to, especially if it means a lot to you that you get that particular position. So going into the interview, people really should have questions prepared for the interview. That would be the probably recommended. Like if I were going to do a video on how to interview more effectively, I would recommend that you have an outline of what questions you want to ask. But you'd be surprised. Most employers, most hiring authorities, they don't, which means you're going to get probably more than 50 to 70% of the time the generic question, so tell me about yourself. Now this question is actually so easy that some people get all balled up into it and get tangled up into it. Some people actually say their life story starting from the very beginning. So if the person you're interviewing with starts off with, tell me about yourself, and you don't want to get all tangled up in that, what you want to do is actually answer the question, but then actually have some questions to follow up. The reason is that's actually a wonderful thing for you if they start out that way, because you have a chance to start to see what they really need to know and make sure it gets into the conversation. In other words, just because they don't have a plan doesn't mean you don't have one, all right? So if they go that route, tell them that the answer. So what you want to do is give a summary answer. So you might want to say, I have a BSME in mechanical engineering from whatever university you came from, and you've done a lot of project design of hydraulic equipment or whatever it is that you have done, preferably in the last 3 to 5 years. And from there, what you want to do is answer the question in a summary way, like I was just saying, and then come up with a question. So you would turn it around and say to them and ask them a question. So what do you need done, and how could I help you the most? And the reason you want to do that is if you could get them to specifically talk about what they need early on in the interview, it gives you a tremendous advantage going forward, because literally every time you're answering a question, you can tailor it towards what they need. So for example, if they come back and say, well, I need you to really be able to manage 7 or 8 projects at a time. I need you to be able to oversee the designers to do the detailed drawings. I need you to be able to spec out the different components of the product we're designing, if it's a piece of machinery, for example. Then now you could come back and say, well, that's wonderful, because I've done that at such and such a company, and then I've managed up to 7 projects at my current employer, and I really, really love that kind of work. So what industries do you actually work with most? And you know, a lot of companies, from a standpoint of their products, their products are used by different industries. So that means a lot of times that the product you would be designing needs to be adjusted for the different application, all right? And I'm sure you know what I'm talking about if you're an engineer. Sometimes you might not be redesigning the entire product from scratch with all the R&D that goes with it. You're just simply modifying the part or the machine that you're working on designing, or the facet of that machine for a particular use in a particular industry. So from that standpoint, you could get into actually what kind of materials they might use to make that part or that piece of equipment, what kind of processes, these are all questions. In other words, one of the greatest ways to interview is to have questions ready. All right, so if you're a mechanical engineer, you might want to know, well, will I have any customer contact? Will I be involved with making the quotes? Because obviously if you're modifying the design of something, you're probably modifying the cost of it. So when the customer asks the sales engineer, for example, that about making, or can you do this? Can you make this? And then it comes back to you, yeah, well, we might even get involved with designing a prototype with those modifications, so that way they help them with the costs, etc. So all this gets you into a dialogue, not a type of interview where you're sitting there where they ask you a question, you answer it, then you wait for the next question and you answer it. And if you end up in that style of interview, from a certain perspective, you're always on defense and you really don't know what they're looking for. So, but if you could take the interview in this direction, really you're helping out your employer or prospective hiring authority or your prospective person that you would report to, get to know you better and get to know your skill set best, especially as your skill set applies to their situation. That's the key. And that's also how you would want to actually adjust your resume if you can guess what they might be looking for. We're going to be talking in another series on how to make a better resume, how to get more responses to your resumes when you submit them to an employer, especially to get the interview with the company you really, really want to go to work for. Because again, if you're already employed, if you want to change positions, I'm sure you want to go to a better situation than you have now. Now, I'm not saying that you're in a bad situation. Actually, the best time to look for a new position is when you're in a good situation, because you only have to make a move when it'll actually benefit you or direct your career in a direction you want to go. Most people really mess up their career because they really only look for a job when they're about to get laid off, or the company gets bought out, and then they end up making a rushed, hurried decision that's not very strategic for the long-term career that they want to have. So I think I'm going to close on that point for today, and we'll be continuing on with our series with Prosperity for America on how to interview more effectively for the position that you want to have. Have a great day.